Welcome to The Corner, LaSource's digital show dedicated to the sport and entertainment industry. Every 2 weeks, we invite a professional to share their experience, background, and challenges. The sport industry moves fast, and having their insights is the best way to keep up to speed. Welcome to The Corner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new Le Corner Podcast International session. Today, we're very happy to welcome Max with us. Hi, Max.
Thank you for having me.
Max is currently at Activision Blizzard, so really interesting for us to have a conversation with you, coming from the sports background, but now working in more the e-gaming industry. I think there are plenty of topics that we're going to be able to cross and discuss, especially considering your background. But first of all, can you introduce yourself to our audience, Max?
Absolutely. Again, thank you for having me. So if my accent doesn't give it away, I'm French. So I'm currently an analytics director at Activision Blizzard, based in London, so in gaming. And prior to this, I was in this sports entertainment sector. I worked for Formula One for 5 years, just after the takeover by Liberty Media from CVC back in 2017. And prior to this, I was in football for City Football Group. So the owner of many clubs, amongst them Manchester City Football Club, and always working in data analytics roles.
Nice. And so you started working in analytics in 2016, which back in the days for sports was like almost non-existing.
Yes. Definitely. Sports was a very different ball game at the time. So obviously I was interested in data, working in data for a while. But transitioning into sports, I had connections and talked to some people working in some NBA franchises back then around 2013, 2014. And I was really expecting them to tell me that, hey, we've been doing this for 10 years. We're really the king of the world. We know everything about it. And back then, it was really just the beginning. About half of the franchises in the NBA were really getting in and getting consumer data, customers' data, and leveraging analytics and modeling on top of it. And that was kind of an awakening for me. I think there's an opportunity there at the middle of sports, business, and data analytics. And that's why I chose to get into this field.
Yeah, interesting. And so what was the status in 2013, if we have to, did they have data lakes? Did they have some sort of CRMs? We now have what we can do with data and in terms of going to segmentation and customization of experiences. We're at a level now where there's a lot of understanding. Deployments is another topic in the sports industry. But what was the status of an NBA franchise in 2013 with their small first glimpses at data?
Pretty much what you said. I think a lot of the topics are more centralized around data infrastructure, right? But back then, on premise, nowadays, the cloud seems an obvious solution. It wasn't back then. Obviously, the use cases as well are getting better with time. And it starts with the basics. So how do you get it in? How do you get it out? One of the common saying in data analytics is crap in, crap out. If you don't have good available data coming in, there's nothing we can really do with it. So a lot of the focus is on this, and obviously NBA teams have more advantages than other sports entities in Europe, for instance, where you don't really have a threat of relegation, or you have a bit more flexibility and freedom to go and advance and invest in some tools that you may not have in other continents like in Europe. But it was definitely the beginning, and they, I think, paved the way for a lot of the sports.
Yeah. And you went into did you want to go into sports, or did you identify analytics as what you wanted to do? What motivated you? Was it sports? Was it analytics? And did you find a way to combine? How did you get to those types of roles?
I'll tell you the story. So I was always very math oriented, very analytical mindset, but I really didn't put it two and two together until when I was in business school. And the idea was to cross an industry with a field. And I first is when I was in business school, I had a marketing professor that was actually an engineer. And he was teaching marketing in a very data analytical way, which really, really hooked me. And that's when I realized actually what I really enjoy is solving complex problems with data and complex business problems. That's really what hooked me up. And then this combined with the visits coming to the US, talking to professionals, I realized there was a an intersection of sports and data, but at core, data and solving problems with data is really what gets me excited. I'm the type of person that the bigger the challenge, the more interested I am. And this is really how it came about. And it just happened that I've been incredibly lucky. I think a lot of people tell me, hey, Formula One is my dream job, dream company. Why did you leave? Like, oh, you're so stupid. I totally understand the feeling. And for me, it was really about trying to merge the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Interesting. And so step back before Formula One, right? Because you were a consultant at Accenture, typical like out of school, and you had experiences, but like that's your natural route, right? And so how did you make it to Manchester City? Like how did you manage to create interest on their side to actually hire you and to start working on that topic?
Sheer luck. I think that's what I was trying to allude to. I was at the right time, in the right place. So at the time, I was reaching out, like literally cold emails, reaching out to people in the industry, either in data in sports, but at the time that was quite rare, or people just in sports and more in marketing related roles. Just happened that I reached out to someone at Manchester City, amongst others. At the time was the head of FRM, fan relationship management. We had a nice call. I was asking questions about how they think about data, and at the end of the day, I said, "Hey, do you have any opportunities?" And he says, "Actually, yes, we have a job opening." And at the time, I was in the US finishing an MBA exchange program, and literally that's how I got the job. And within 2 weeks, I had done interviews and I had booked my plane ticket straight to Manchester from the US, and I started not long after. So sheer luck, and a very similar story as to how I moved from Manchester City to Formula One is someone that I was in touch with at the time when I met him. He was director of partnerships for World Rugby, so the International Rugby Federation, and he was moving on to a job at F1, and he reached out to me on LinkedIn out of the blue saying, "Hey, we're building new teams. There's big challenge at Formula One. Would you be interested?" And fast forward a couple of weeks, here I am in London working for Formula One. So I can't say it's just because I'm amazing. I got incredibly lucky.
Well, it's a thing that our audience is a mix of students and professionals from the sector, and so it doesn't sound as much as luck as it doesn't sound as much as luck as appetite for something where you reached out and once the opportunity showed up, you actually managed to make the connection. Because I think it's important also like to educate, like it's by reaching out, by being interested, and by bringing an expertise in a conversation that afterwards you get the chance to potentially get a mentor or somebody you get along well, and that brings you afterwards from one gig to the other. Because sports industry is a tiny one, but when you show expertise, there is a chance to shine on a certain topic. And just like maybe it'd be because Formula One is your longer experience, but to finish on Manchester City or City Group back in the days, right? City was still a growing organization, right? What were the topics? Like what were the data sources? What were you looking to do? Like what kind of infrastructure was being put together? Was it all about in venue? Was it that first vision of saying, hey, no, we want to be an international brand and like all the digital touch points are important? Like what was the scheme of the work at a City Group football club in 2016?
Absolutely. So the whole overarching strategies were part of the FRM group, which I think was quite unique at the time. I'm not sure how every single football club is structured, but I think at the time it's quite unique. Whereas what most people think is you're in there to make revenue, you're in there to sell tickets. The overarching idea was a bit more, I think was a bit more complex slash bigger scale than this. The idea is you have um, you have a fandom journey from you don't even know Manchester City, just simplifying just with City, but to of you. It's one of the teams that you support. It's your favorite team. It's your favorite team, and you go to the games regularly. You're a season ticket holder, and then you move on to the super hardcore engaged season ticket holder, away games, buy merchandise, and everything. And obviously, one might think, oh, you're just here to focus on what brings revenue, which is mostly ticketing, and that's in that span. But the overarching goal for us is how can we move everyone along the funnel one step further? Not everyone is going to become a season ticket holder. There's a limited number of tickets. Not everyone is in and around Manchester to come to the games, but it's an international sport, it's an international fan base. So we need to move everyone in the funnel, and there are multiple opportunities to monetize directly or indirectly in that funnel if you have an extremely engaged fan base in using random example, in South Korea, you can leverage that knowledge and that insight for lots of different things, partnership being the most important one. But it's really the idea of let's move everyone down the funnel. What does it take for someone from a light engaged fan to become a bit more engaged, and from someone who lives in Manchester, is a fan that has never bought a ticket, and let's try and move everyone along the funnel. That was the overarching strategy.
Nice. And just in terms of the user personas, right? Because this local Manchester City fan is very different than the Korean audience, right? What were the targets back then? Was it all about direct revenue by ultimately bringing the users down a funnel of merchandising or extraordinary experience if you're from Korea to come to the match? Or was it more, okay, we wanted to start structuring our data in a way where we could afterwards sell it in an efficient way to sponsors? Because I'm also assuming, right, there's the fact of collecting the data, structuring the data, but afterwards there's the fact of selling the data and who can be interested in a local territory like South Korea to actually spend on that dedicated core fan kind of audience. What was the mindset back then? Because now everybody's trying to mix everything. There's still a lot of uncertainty on how to go about it, but curious to understand like what was the rationale, and if the type of engagement and objectives were the same for the local versus the international fans.
Simply put, different sets of personas. So we did work on clustering segmentations along with the database, but also with our insights team. So surveys, qualitative, quantitative research. And the idea is we had different sets of tools for different things. So we had a very specific set of personas and targeting segmentations for selling tickets, which is very different than in fan base in general, which is a lot more international, a lot more global. On the ticketing side, the main differences were you had Premier League games, mostly weekends, ideally lunchtime. Unfortunately, sometimes due to TV scheduling, you might have some Monday evening, which is a bit more painful. But usually the crowd was a lot more family oriented, a lot more older, parents bringing kids. And then you have the Champions League, which is a whole different ball game because the timing is the same for everyone, but in the UK, you're an hour earlier than in Europe. So you had a bit more millennial fan base, a bit less family oriented because parents have to get out of work, pick up the kids from school, then go to the game. It's different crowds. And so in order to sell these things, you were targeting very differently for that specific example. And you have more broader fan engagement groups or fan engagement segmentation personas as well, that you also act in differently. On the more accessing data from a partnership side, just for the record, there is no data selling. Obviously, GDPR being very important, but I think what you meant is more leveraging the information, like sending emails to Korean fan base for specific Korean sub partnership. Again, using the same example, and the idea is for each different case scenario, you use different tools. If you try to sell tickets, you have a set of tools and data analysis and insights tailored for this. It's more on the partnership side. Very different tools as well.
Yeah. I feel like I can go down a rabbit hole of just this experience, but there's a whole lot to unfold. So I guess we'll get to more topics around how to cross the data points and like what kind of infrastructure you saw already back then building. But let's move on to the Formula One, which was a longer cycle for you to be able not only to analyze but also to choose, deploy, measure the output of your work. So tell us more about your transition from City to Formula One. And you were saying Formula One is the dream job for a lot of people because Formula One has a set of very hardcore fans that they managed to open up with Drive to Survive, but there are very hardcore fans. So tell us about that journey moving from Citigroup to Formula One, and what was the premise when you joined Formula One and with your acquisition from Liberty?
Couple of massive differences. Being a league versus a club, you have a very different revenue streams. Obviously, on the club level, is mostly sponsorship and ticketing. Formula One being a league, but also one of a kind league, where Formula One, like most leagues, generate most of its revenues through TV rights. A lot of revenues through sponsorship. The one thing that's quite unique to Formula One is through promoters. People that might not be in the sports industry may not be fully aware of this, but Formula One doesn't organize their own Grand Prix. They sell them. So if you're a city, a government, a private track owner, you can pay Formula One to come to a track. Obviously, that means you keep the ticketing and gate receipts. A lot of the cost is on you of organization, security, and others. But so technically, Formula One mostly operate in a B2B environment. So in terms of type of data to work on. And obviously, when you work in data analytics, the main output you're trying to get to is how to improve performance, maybe simply revenue, or maybe fan engagement, fan database, all the different things. So that's number one big difference, is the business is different. Number two, even though Formula One was a big brand name, still is to this day even more so, there was very little, if nothing. So one of the main challenges to start with is creating a fan database. Some data was existing, some in lots of different pieces and places, but no aggregated view was put together. Again, because F1 was run as a B2B business that, in essence, didn't really give much thought to the end consumer in a B2B2C environment. And most of the strategy, and you mentioned Drive to Survive, was to connect to the end consumer even more. Drive to Survive being one big element. At the time, we tested a lot of things. A lot of things didn't work out. Drive to Survive was an immense success that none of us would have predicted when we did it in the first place. I'm not taking credit for it. I'm not the one who did it, but I'm saying the general we.
Yeah.
And one of the big element was F1 TV. I think the ability to monetize directly to consumers by creating an OTT platform. A lot of legal implications to the current contracts enabling you, yes or not, to monetize directly. It wasn't available, and to this day is not available in every market. But from a data perspective, it means that it's even more important database that you can leverage, that you can sell directly to consumers, collect that information. Once you're in a subscription business, like Spotify, Amazon Prime, and others, you have a lot of data that comes in as to churn prediction, how to monetize better, keep people engaged, and others. And so a lot of challenges along the way. And the third main difference is at Manchester City, City Football Club, as much as he had relationship to lots of different clubs, most of my time was dedicated to Manchester City Football Club versus other clubs. At F1, you have a lot of also time spent on connecting with the teams, with the sponsors. So there's a lot of sponsorship data that was involved with, connecting with a lot of different area organizations that we can try and help and grow the sport together. So a lot of stakeholder management was also a big difference.
Interesting. And I'm assuming coming in, the almost only available data, and like obviously cutting corners, but was probably social media reach. Because if it was a B2B, right, like typically I'm thinking 2016, 2017, if they're selling the rights and the tracks and media went to the media, organization of events went to the organization of events, the only traction that must have been coming back to the F1 proprietary channels, but like in this scenario, social media accounts, I'm assuming that was the only data. So I guess there was a whole project about how to route from that to there, and like leaving to the side afterwards the topics that we're going to go in terms of what it meant with sponsorships, with local partners, etc. But I'm assuming that's what you came in.
Yes and no. So the funny thing is, it might seem crazy to this day to think about this, but at the time, teams and drivers were not allowed to post any F1 related content on their socials. For the simple reason, which makes sense when you think about it, that it's the crown jewel. Some TV channels are paying insane amount of money to get this content. Why do we give it for free for others to publish? And so that was one of the first decision by Liberty, or post-Liberty acquisition, was to allow drivers and teams to post. And now it's like, duh, obviously. It wasn't back then. But funny enough, F1...
I will say that the I think it unblocked itself a little bit recently, but until not so long ago, the rules around athletes and teams sharing content were still very, very strict.
100%. And so that obviously was one thing. So the social media following blew up afterwards. One of the very specific elements to F1 that it has an insane amount of very tech savvy engineer type of fans. And so F1 being obviously a racing sport, there's a lot of timing. So F1 had a live timing element, and on the website, if you logged into the website, you could access to some kind of live timing. And so that data was there, but it was literally sitting in the supplier environment. And no one was trying to get access to this and understand how many people do log in and who are these people. And so we could starting to generate and aggregate all the data together in one single environment. We had different sources to pull from, the website data being the biggest one, but it was literally untouched until we arrived, which is surprising.
Yeah. Interesting. And so as we unfold that, right, like, so there's this topic on the website. One of the big things now is the fantasy league. I'm not sure back then it was actually in place, but what were the mechanics for you guys to capture data, and what was the infrastructure that you guys put in place on your digital properties to actually capture it? Like, were we talking CRM? Were we already talking CDPs? Like, where were you at?
Well, starting a CRM already, that was literally one of the projects. Everyone was not sending emails to anyone. So that was one of the big projects. Fantasy being one of them. So a lot of way to collect data. It's all about value offering, right? What do you give away? What do you give to people for them to be willing to give them the information, to give you the information? Fantasy is one of them, and I saw that firsthand when I was a City Football Group, and the success of the Fantasy Premier League in the UK is insane. And there was a system, which I'm pretty sure still to this day, if you play Fantasy Premier League, you can toggle who's your favorite team, and you can accept for your data to be shared to them. And I was seeing this data firsthand when I was a city. I was like, well, that's quite big. And it's definitely one way to acquire. The live timing element is a big one.
Yeah,
Enabling fans that may not have a TV around them that still want to access or see the numbers. A lot of people were very, very excited by this, especially
yeah,
because of the nature of the sport, the qualifying, and how much time is important. And the people that really, really engage on the high level, they really look at the free practice sessions. They're trying to assess who's going to be good, who's not going to be good. And so they pay a lot of attention to the numbers. And that was a huge driver for gathering information. To some extent, as much as F1 doesn't monetize, doesn't sell tickets, F1 has act as a reseller for the promoters. So if you go to the F1 website, you can still buy some tickets that we technically don't keep the revenue on. We kind of pass it on. But that also generates a lot of data. And we also started to do a lot more competitions. Enter this competition to go on.
on that front, because it's important. You're saying you were reselling the tickets, but usually, typically, the ticket masters of this world, et cetera, they try to keep the data for themselves, and they're not so keen on sharing it. What was it? Did you oblige people to register before actually buying the tickets so that you had those data points on your side? Or what was the mechanic there to acquire the data?
So I don't have the exact numbers, but the idea being, if you are a Grand Prix and you pay F1 X million dollars a year to get, we're allowed to resell a tiny fraction of these tickets on our website for fan servicing, right? And that's the idea. So if the tickets we sell, we have that information. But obviously,
Okay.
if people go on the Grand Prix XYZ website and buy the tickets, we had no
Yeah.
access to this for a simple reason. That is not in the interest of any promoter for F1 to get access, because then that gives them more leverage in negotiation. So that I
Yeah.
think is quite simple. But there was a wave, and there was not a fraction of the total amount of tickets. Um, and it definitely social being a big driver of growing and trying to give more things for people to do, and like trying to create value for them to be engaging them and giving us the information, and trying to create good enough CRM campaigns to inform them. And also that's the uniqueness of Formula One. Formula One creates a lot of its own content. If you go to Formula1.com, you're going to have a lot of articles, interviews, videos, explanations, explainers that most leagues don't do. And I think it's just unique to F1 and how it's shaped and how it started. Is it's also a media content machine that creates a lot of information that we can also piggyback on and give more access to people behind the scenes of some. And so that's also a big factor in trying to grow the database.
Yeah. And did you try to, because we're talking about that, did you try to create some bridges in terms of data acquisition between you and broadcasters first, and then you and in venue, right? Like from participation, QR codes on the stream so that people were redirected to Formula One platforms, in venue engagement in some kind of way where you would be able to acquire some of the data or route people to your application to then authenticate? Like, were you putting in place some mechanics to be able to do that?
Mostly with the teams. So a lot of effort was trying to, because one of the difficulty is obviously the league is powerful, but what people recognize is the drivers and the teams, right? The F1 is good, but if you're Ferrari or if you're Lewis Hamilton, it has
Yeah.
a bit more attractive power. So we're trying to do a lot with the teams and trying to do co-competitions with kind of a double opt-in GDPR compliant statements, and these is where we're trying to put a lot of focus and efforts. We're not doing enough, I think, on the ones you mentioned, which are definitely good ideas. I think it's all about prioritization and small team as well.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you know, and everyone listening might know, sports in general is not known for a lot of staffing. So you have to do a lot of output for a limited number of teams. So there are a lot of
Yeah.
things that I wish I had done, and the one dimensions are some of
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully AI will help us solve some of those needs in terms of scaling some of the activations that can be done. Okay, so that's so mostly with the team. So broadcasters, not so much because it was so political in terms of
them. Yeah,
the price of the rights and the structure back then. Assuming it might be a bit different. And just why I'm asking all those questions is because one of the big things we believe in at LaSource is like the centralization and how Ferrari understands that they're a partner of Lewis Hamilton, but also Formula One because all of them feed each other. And so there's an element of how do you actually get that? And actually, the broadcasters, to some extent, are subject to the value that is being created outside of their channels during the right cycle that they have, and all sorts of things entail to that. Sponsorship. One of the big things is how does Formula One address sponsorship and the data you can get from it, considering everything that you set up, that Ferrari is a brand of its own, and then the venues we're actually acquiring the rights to actually not produce but organize the events in their territories. What was the relationship with sponsors, and were sponsors interested in the qualified data that you were able to bring to them? Because I'm assuming there was no segmentation or customization of journey quite yet. Were they interested in that qualified data? Did they value it in the right way?
absolutely, 100%. Obviously, every sponsor is different. If it's we're talking about a B2B brand trying to sell, I'm using random examples here based to illustrate, trying to sell security services to other companies, it might feel less so relevant. If you're a big brand B2C trying to sell watches, that might be a bit more relevant. 100%. The one key thing to start with is obviously F1. One of the main challenges is what sponsors buy mostly, not just, but mostly, is the ability to be seen and viewed by millions of people across 22, 23, 24 weekends a year. And that's is insane. So a lot of the effort was focused on this, about how to optimize this exposure, how to make it better for everyone. The challenge with this is the length of an F1 race varies a lot. What happens during the race varies a lot. If there's an accident at a given corner at a given race, and like there's a still camera angle that stays there for 3 minutes because there's something to see, it makes a big difference. So one of the biggest example of my time there was, I think, the 2017 Singapore Grand Prix, when you had the two Ferraris sandwiching Max Verstappen on literally the first corner, and you had a massive Singapore airline logo. So they were extremely pleased with this because it stayed there for a while. But then you can't justify the next year you're down. Yeah, but we're not going to have that type of event happening. And it's
Yeah.
all about also forecasting. And the idea is you have contractual targets that you need to hit across the year. And so how do we best position the partners around the track to hit what we need to hit for them to be happy? And that was also a big element of the work. And at the time, it was less flashy than it is today, but we started using AI models to try and better track and better plan where should we put the Rolex signage at the time, no more partner. Emirates, same, it was at the time, not anymore. Or Heineken signage around the track to try and optimize and maximize all this placing and positioning. It's a bit simpler in other sports. In football, in an 90-minute game, you have the rotating LEDs and such. It wasn't as simple for us. And the added difficulty came from COVID. Obviously, withstanding all the difficulties of organization and others, we did like a 13 race season, which obviously was very difficult. We had to come to the same track multiple times in the same season. And we still had targets to hit, and we had to maximize and optimize. So that was also an added challenge on the sponsorship side that we're trying to overcome.
Yeah, interesting. But here for the sponsors, it was mostly the eyeballs that we're discussing, right? More than the qualified data in the examples that you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, to start with, because again, we started from so little, so it took us some time to get our organized data in order. And that was also that's the crown jewel that people buy from Formula One, is the ability to be seen by millions of people on every given weekend. So that's where a lot of the effort were put, absolutely.
Nice. Nice. And one last question on the Formula One journey, because we mentioned Drive to Survive and you mentioned that you tried different things. And it's interesting also to hear that there were failures before the Netflix example of Drive to Survive that has influenced the sports industry so much since. Um, in that collaboration with them, did you guys think about data sharing, the reach, etc.? Like what was there a data angle to that conversation? And did you manage to play that at your advantage?
So to give credit where credit is due, the Draft to Survive ID and execution came from Sean Bratches, who was the commercial director at the time, and Ian Holmes, who's the TV rights director. So all of the credit should be given to them. Unfortunately, and that's where my frustration came, is we had little to no access to any data. I think from a simple leverage perspective, that if Netflix knows how big it is for them, we might be trying to get more money for it. But also, they've been historically very difficult to get information from in general about how many subscribers does Netflix have and others. And that was difficult. So we're
Yeah.
trying to assess via all the classic elements of surveying, asking questions, and doing surveys online on others, focus groups as to how efficient this has been, but it was very difficult for me to get an exact number about how many people watched it.
Yeah.
And we had some stats about completion rates and others, but all the ones that you really wanted to have access to, that's the ones that you couldn't see.
Yeah. Why I'm asking is I'm 100% sure, 100%, let's put 90% sure that they would never strike something like that, because now they know the leverage that they have for the brand. But back then, because there was no reference case before, I was wondering if it could have been something that was part of the negotiation, knowing that those types of platforms typically make their success on their data ownership. But it was an interesting one.
I wish, trust me.
Yeah, yeah, it would have been different. And so Formula One to Activision Blizzard. Tell us about that switch. Like, what happened? What made you want to join it? Obviously, well, actually, you'll tell us how good is esports with data.
So that's the funny thing. So I don't work in esports, but I'll come on to this. In terms of transition, it came out. So there is, for people who might have been in similar situations, is when, because it was new ownership, there's this really big momentum and move forward and lots of different ideas. Draft to Survive being one of the very recognizable ones. Um, After 5 years, after COVID, it was very difficult. So unlike gaming, sports obviously struggled massively during COVID. I think Formula One revenue numbers went from 2 billion something to 1.1 billion during the COVID year. So that was definitely a challenge. Restructuring, trying to reassess how we do things, how we do things better. I felt like we were coming at the end of the road. A lot of people that have been in the same journey as me joined after the takeover were there for 4 or 5 years and like starting to look around. And that's how I had the chance to move ship and go to Activision Blizzard. The very interesting bit to me is a lot of people see gaming and sports as so at odds. I do not. So a lot of similarities. First, they're entertainment business. They really drive fandom. You have a core group of very engaged people, and that's extremely similar. But the truth is, you're selling content in different shape, way, or forms. F1, you're selling TV rights. You're selling the rights to organize the race. You're selling the ability for someone to watch the race from their own laptop. And in gaming, you might be selling either boxes with the CDs in it, you might be selling a free to play game with some microtransactions in it, or you might be selling a subscription to play a game like World of Warcraft. But these are extreme, very big similarities. And the most important, and where I personally fit mostly into, is the idea that you have industries that used to be mostly B2B. Any sports selling TV rights sponsorship and others to other companies try to be more B2C. And in gaming, it used to be long time ago, but you sell boxes of CDs with games on it to retailers, and then your job is done. And whether or not people play it in the end is not really a problem. And that transition to data is more important. You have to gather it, you have to understand it, you have to understand the consumers, and you can generate a lot of insights and revenue out of it, either directly or indirectly. And this is where it's literally the exact same scenario. So what I do today is extremely similar to what I was doing back then within a different organization. The one thing that is extremely different though is the size. Now being in the business of 10,000 employees, I'm not even sure exactly how many, is a whole different than being an organization at F1 where you have more like 250 commercial staff. I'm putting logistical elements on the side. And so this you have to navigate very differently, but the crux of it is the same.
Super interesting. Yeah, it was pure wholesale back in the days then, and so curious to understand, like, how do you capture data when you're in Activision at Activision? Like, what are the touch points, right? Like in sports, it's pretty crystal clear. And at least we try to frame it in a way where everybody could like actually go through the journey of a user to be able to understand where are the data sources coming from. what are the data sources for an Activision in this 2025 world?
So I'll specify based on platforms. So Activision Blizzard, we have PC games, console games, and mobile games. At the crux of it, if it's a platform that you don't own, Sony, Xbox, so PlayStation, Xbox, Steam for PC, or iOS, Android, and others, but I'll put phone on the side for now. The challenge that you have, and you have a similar challenge in sports that I allude to, is you don't know exactly who's buying your game. You only know someone who decides playing your game. So especially nowadays, where it's more common for people to have a registration before starting to play. So you buy your game from PlayStation Store. We don't know who you are. We see the revenue come in, but we have no idea who you are because there's no
Yeah.
data transfer on that side. But then when you start playing your game, you have to log in, and then we get information, and then we can track who this person is. And it's a very similar problem in sports when you have the lead ticket buyer and you don't know who is coming with this person, especially on the B2B side where someone buys 10 tickets. You know who booked it, the assistant at XYZ company. You have no idea who's showing up at the stadium. And very similar data issue or data challenge there. And then when it comes to wealth and depth of data, gaming is a lot more because then you have all the telemetry information, but what everyone is doing within our game, which then is fully in your environment and you have full grasp and control on. And that paved the way for a lot of the things. And then I'm going to also specify a difference in my job is in sports, when you work in data, you work either what I call sports analytics, where your job is to improve sports performance. So you work on Opta data or other things to work on the athlete side.
Yeah.
Same for Formula One. If you're in a team and you're trying to find the best strategy to make the car go faster. On the business side, obviously, I was very much on the business side. You have a very similar thing in gaming, where initially you have what we call the studios, which is the people creating the games of creative developers and others, and you have what we call the publishers, which is the people in charge of monetizing. And this is where my role is. So my job is not around how can we improve XYZ feature to make people enjoy more of the game or play longer. It's mostly on the monetization side. So this is where it's very similar, and you have slightly different roles in data within the organization.
Yeah. So ultimately, from the moment somebody logs into the game, you start capturing the data, and then you have the possibility of saying in that user journey, you have all the metrics of how people consume it to then be able to let people know or commercialize what needs to be commercialized based on all the data that you gather from the people using it, and where do they stop and what do they see and what has value and what has not value. That's ultimately the most important part.
And the one difference is we do own one of the channel, which is called Battle.net, which is our PC launcher. And then we have access to more information. So then when someone makes a purchase, because they're logged into our own system launchers, what we call it, we have more data on this, but we're going into the intricacies, but yeah.
No, but it is interesting. So in microtransaction, you don't have the information?
No, we do. With microtransaction, we do because there are actions from within the game.
From within the game. But okay, so it's
Exactly. Also because there's a system that even if you buy out of the game, we need to grant you the item. And so we know who that is. But what I mean by that is someone, especially when it comes to pre-orders, usually we announce the game launching in October, November, and you can pre-order from August, September. In the world where we are not the one who owns the platform where the transaction happens, so Xbox Store, PlayStation Store, we don't know who that person is until they log into the game. But if it's Battle.net, which is our own platform, we know the information from the pre-order. This is where you get into funny different things where you can do something on some platforms, but not on some others.
And one question I have for you is, one of the targets to know who the buyer is versus the user? Like, are you trying to target the buyers of the games who might be the parents, or is everything focused on the end user, because at the end they're the ones using and they are the ones who are going to go back to the buyers afterwards to tap into their wallet? Because
mostly
from a parent perspective, I'm thinking I would never offer a skin by default to my son, but maybe that's what he wants and that's what would be a good surprise. How would I know? How would I be targeted in that way?
A lot of our games are not technically kid friendly, so I don't think the kids audience is our main audience. I don't think we run into this problem that much, especially if I make the parallel with the sports industry. You have more this issue where the lead booker might buy more than one ticket. It doesn't really translate that much into gaming because usually it's one gamer, and you can attach quite nicely, and the match rates is very high versus who makes the purchase and who plays the game. In sports, it's a bigger problem. We run into this issue a lot at City and even at F1, where or more at City actually, where the lead booker may not be the person attending the game, and especially when it comes to season tickets, there's a whole other array of people transferring them, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're trying to collect accurate information, it might be a problem. And that one is much harder to solve.
Yeah. Well, and now there are quite a few systems in sports, right? The transactions reselling platform are obviously very big, and because they actually tackle all sorts of other needs of presence and venue, and then the average basket. So I think that at least a lot of the big clubs now kind of are able to track all the hands through which the tickets go. And that is why also Wimbledon or Roland Garros, all those kind of events now oblige you to download the application to have access to your own personal ticket to be able to capture all of that. Um, in terms of the way CRMs and CDPs are being used in sports, in the sports sector, it's mostly about retargeting an email campaign. It might be push notifications, and may be in-app notifications and customizations of your user experience. What are the things that you have at hand to be able to personalize the journeys of the users? Do you have different types of user experiences inside the game based on the data that you collect? Are you able to narrate that down? Like, what are the possibilities that you have that we don't?
In sports, it's definitely always a bit of a challenge. Some of the things that we used to do, for instance, that touch on this but slightly differently, was less so about offering a different personalized path to someone versus someone else based on what we know about them. It was more about how can we optimize what we're doing. So one of the example of the projects that we did at F1, and it's very similar to something we did at City, is we looked at all the web traffic information, especially F1 websites and apps we use quite a lot. And the idea is we want to retarget people that we think are likely to buy our F1 TV product. But we have millions and millions of visitors, and not all of them was that qualified or that interested. So we use machine learning models to try and better track, attach for every single cookie, so anonymous user, what is we think the probability to purchase our item. And what we did is very similar to the US elections, is the ones that are very likely to purchase, we do nothing, aka the states where either they're very red or very blue, you don't do anything. And same for the ones in the below, but you really focus on the swing states. So we really focus on the people that are on the fence. And
Yeah,
and because you want to the most out of your marketing bucks, again, very similar to the US election, you want to invest your money where you think they're going to make an impact. So who are the people that might be on the fence, and by retargeting them efficiently, even though we don't know who they are, but we're talking about anonymous cookies, we feel we can make most out of our marketing budget. And that's one of the projects that we did. That was very interesting. Um, and so it's less about different personalized path, but it's for us more how can we optimize what we're doing.
yeah. I love the reference to the swing states. It makes a lot of sense, and how to optimize your marketing budget, because at some point you can't target, and you want to target the money right, especially with the variations of the price of acquisition according to the platforms can ruin your business
Pretty
ultimately.
much.
Um, Cool, super interesting. And what are some of the things that excite you of being on an Activision side of things versus a sports department? Or is it something where you're also keen on going back to the sports sector at some point?
I'm someone who's driven by challenges. So a good challenge always excites me, wherever it might be. The one thing I find slightly more exciting, and I think is just by the scale and the advancement, is just the number of people and the size of the database and what you can get into, and the size of the revenue attached to it is much bigger. So when we talk about B2B versus direct to consumer, the share of revenue from direct to consumer in any sports entity that varies a lot by different ones is a lot smaller than what it might be in gaming. So
Yeah,
obviously, where I still B2B analytics is still a thing, is still very important, and you can yield a lot of benefits out of it. I get most excited by B2C side and like the vast trove of data and how to leverage this in a smart way. And this is where it's for now, well, very exciting where I am.
yeah,
But as you said, not closing any door. We never know what tomorrow might bring.
yeah. And I have one last question. One of the big angles that the sports industry is looking at to capitalize on the data is the loyalty programs. I'm thinking where naturally an Activision coming from the wholesale kind of sell, is loyalty something that's big in esports and for an Activision? Like, do you have programs to be able to tackle that? Are they things you have in place that are mature? Is it stuff that you're looking at? Where do you stand on that?
It is very much extremely important. Not necessarily so in a program like an airline where you gain points and such like this. I think for in sports, what's very interesting is there's a way to de-anonymize your base. And that's where sports see most of the value. And City at the time, I'm not even sure it still exists, but we had the Citizen program,
Yeah,
F1. I can't remember the exact name. I know the code name that we used was called F1 Unlocked, but I'm pretty sure when it launched, it wasn't the same name. But it's a
yeah,
similar thing where it's the layer on top of free that's free to access, but it's behind a registration wall. And at the time, I remember at City a long time ago, one of the massive debate was the crown jewel of content was the match recap. And there was a massive debate between different people in the business where should it be before or after registration? And depending on where people were incentivized on, are they incentivized in web visits, are they incentivized in people in the database? You had two different angles, and there's no right or wrong answer, but that was a big thing. And that pain point doesn't really exist in gaming because to play your game, you have to log in. So we have pretty much all the data we need. So in the sense of de-anonymizing the fan base, that's why we don't have the similar thing that we might exist in sports. But yes, loyalty, super engaged fans, the ladder of light core people that play little and super high engaged, it's even more so important in gaming in the sense that if you have a game that's multiplayer based, which you have network effects, so the more players, the better the experience for everyone is versus single player games that it doesn't matter if there's one or 10,000 people playing at the same time. So it's very, very important. But it's not in the sense of we want to, it's a reward program, but also in the way I'm targeting the pain points. The way, why does it exist in airlines is to try and make customers buy from your company versus another because you have a very high um, you have a very high substitute rate. You can't buy the same service. Similarly, when you have your Tesco card or Sainsbury's, I live in the UK, replaced by whichever distributor in your own market, is to make people choose you versus someone else. In gaming, you might games that might be similar and you might have overlap between games, but no game is the same. You don't have a high substitute rate. So it doesn't solve the exact same problem,
yeah,
but it is still very important. And we definitely look working into it as to how to make people stay engaged and come back more often and trying to have some kind of rewards in some way, shape, or form. We're
yeah.
definitely doing this.
Am I reading that it's more vertical? Like ultimately, you will recognize that a player of a game is going to just keep playing that one same game, and the content discovery is maybe not as important. And also, is there not like a lot of opportunities in like selling merch alongside it and getting people to start buying the merch, or that's not a big topic as on an Activision side of things?
It exists. I don't think is part of the core strategy to cross sell,
Yeah,
if I might say. What's true though, it's one of the massive topic that we have in gaming that doesn't really exist in sports is what we call win backs. It's people that used to play your game but you haven't seen in a while, and now you're
yeah,
trying to re-engage them. You might think about it from a ticketing perspective, like all ticket buyers that you haven't seen in a while. That we put extremely a lot of efforts into how do we talk to them because the problem is once they're out of your platform, they don't play your game anymore. You
yeah,
lose the easiest way to connect to them and talk to them. So
yeah,
where do we find them? How do we retarget them? What's the right message to get them to come back? What
yeah,
are the reasons they don't come back? And we alleviate some of these reasons. And to link back to the fidelity program or loyalty program, one of the things we did for one of our games, which is called Hearthstone, which is a card collection game. Long story short, the more you lapse, the harder it is to come back because you miss a lot of cards. So what we did is offering free card packs to players to engage them and say, hey, it's you. We try and alleviate the pain point of coming back and make it simpler for you. And it was huge success. But we're making very specific to what is the problem we're trying to run into and solve.
yeah. Super interesting. Um, See, we're already at 50 minutes. So you were asking what was going to be the length, but it was a very filled up 50 minutes. We usually like asking a question to our guests. What's in your professional life or personal life? What's a series, a book, a newspaper, a source of information that you would like to recommend to our audience? who would like to know more about analytics and understand that space a bit more, or not. You choose.
Well, I have a book in mind, and funny enough, people might not think it's linked to analytics, but I think it very much is. It's called The Enduring Project by Michael Lewis, who is the same author that did Moneyball that most people know. And he tells the story about Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, who are the founding fathers of behavioral economics, which is why people do the things they do, even though it sometimes doesn't make sense. And coming from quote unquote a numbers guy, it might sound weird, but for me, it's because data can capture a lot of things. There's a lot of things that it doesn't know and it cannot do for you. And I think this book would be very interesting to complete to as a way to have a to merge with the data side and don't trust the data just because the data apply some level of judgment. So that would be my advice, the Undoing Project by Michael Lewis.
Nice. Love it. And who would you recommend us to invite on our podcast?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think you should talk to Matt Roberts. He used to be my boss at Formula One, who until recently was VP of Insights and Business Intelligence at Formula E, and is now back into the F1 world. And he works with Aston Martin. I think he'd be an amazing guest.
Terrific. Love it. Max, thanks a lot for your time. Super interesting. I'm sure our audience is going to love it.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for the invite.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the episode. As usual, don't hesitate to like, share, talk about it on social media or wherever you are. And we look forward to welcome you for another episode.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoy it as much as we love creating them. If you like the episode, feel free to comment, rate, and share with people around you. You can visit our website, www.lasource.io, to learn more about our activities. You will discover a wide range of articles and can subscribe to our newsletter to receive the latest tech and sports news in your mailbox every month. Stay tuned for new episodes.
Le corner.